Okay, hello again, everybody. We're now going to take our graphing of rational functions to the next level. So I have some notes here, and again, we're not picking up a notebook, but if you want to copy this down for later reference, feel free. But you can also just look at the video a second time if you need help. So we're going to talk about horizontal asymptotes and how to find them in a rational function when you graph a rational function. So you want to compare the degree of the top of the rational function with the bottom. So remember, the degree is the highest exponent. And as soon as I go through this stuff, you'll see three examples and it'll put it into practice for you. So number one, if the degree of the denominator is greater than the degree of the numerator, then the horizontal asymptote is the x-axis. So again, look at the highest power of the denominator. If that's greater than the highest power of the numerator, then your horizontal asymptote is the x-axis. Another situation is if the degree of the denominator is equal to the degree of the numerator, then the horizontal asymptote is y equals the ratio of those lead coefficients. And again, we're going to see that in our examples here in a few minutes. But repeating, if the degree of the denominator and the numerator are equal, then your horizontal asymptote for that graph is the equation y equals the ratio of those lead coefficients. We'll come back to that pretty quickly. Let's talk about the x and y intercepts of a rational function. Remember, x-intercept is where the graph crosses the x-axis. The y-intercept is where the graph crosses the y-axis. So we're going to follow these steps here in a minute, but to find the x-intercept, you want to set the numerator of your fraction equal to 0 and solve for x. So there it is. We told you that. We're going to do that example. You can look back at that if you need it. To find out the y-intercept of your graph, set x equal to 0, no matter where it occurs, set x equal to 0 and solve for y. And that'll give you the y-intercept because remember, the points on the y-axis have an x-coordinate of 0. Okay, so that's a bunch of talk, but let's go ahead and put all this into practice by working some examples here. So on version 2 of graphing rational functions, I picked out several that are going to be helpful for us. So look at number 1. I'm going to replace f of x with y. So y equals x minus 2 divided by x plus 1. So that's a rational function. And we're going to graph it with our new techniques. First of all, let's talk about the asymptotes. So to find the vertical asymptote, look at the denominator of the fraction. Find out what can x be that makes that denominator 0. Because remember, you can't divide by 0. So if you look at this equation, you can just tell by looking at it that when x is -1, you'll have division by 0. So we're going to put a vertical asymptote at x equals -1. The graph will not touch anywhere on this vertical line. So there's your vertical asymptote for that rational function. Now, do you remember what we said about horizontal asymptotes? We compare the degree of the top of the fraction with the degree of the bottom. So the degree of the top is 1 because that's x to the first power, and the degree of the bottom is 1 because it's also x to the first power. So when the two degrees are equal like that, then your horizontal asymptote is y equals the ratio of the lead coefficients. So the lead coefficients are both 1 there. So y equals 1 is your horizontal asymptote for that graph. Okay, so we got both asymptotes in there. We still don't have the graph itself. So this time we're going to find the graph by identifying where it crosses the x-axis and the y-axis. So right now we're going to look for the x-intercept. So the x-intercept, remember, is where the graph crosses the x-axis. So all the points on the x-axis have a y-coordinate of 0. Well, how do you look at that rational function? How do you get y be equal to 0? Well, y is 0 where the top of the fraction is 0. All right, so y is 0 where the top of the fraction is 0. Well, what makes the top of the fraction 0? 2, when x is 2. So 2, 0, you have a point on your graph, which is the x-intercept. Okay, now we know how to draw that. We talked about this before. Your graph is trapped in between the horizontal and vertical asymptotes down there in the lower right. So sketch it in there. Remember, it's got that boomerang shape. There is that branch of the graph just based on one point on the x-axis. Okay, now let's also find the y-intercept of this graph. So where does it cross the y-axis? Okay, so remember the y-intercept of a graph is where x is 0. So you're going to put in 0 for x and solve for y. So just you can do it mental math. Look up at your equation. Plug in 0 for x in 2 locations, and you got negative 2 divided by positive 1. So that's negative 2. Well, okay, I guess we already had that. I didn't draw it in there very well, but there's the y-intercept. So actually, the x-intercept and the y-intercept both occur on the same branch of the graph. So that didn't help us get that other branch. So in that situation, we are going to have to choose one more point and make a table so that we can find out where is the other branch of the graph to the left of the vertical asymptote. Okay, as we've already seen, we only need one point, so we're going to choose a point that makes it easy to calculate. I'm going to choose negative 2 there for x. And I got to put that into 2 locations. So on the top of the fraction, I got negative 4. Plugging in negative 2 for x there. And the bottom of the fraction, I got a negative 2 plus 1 is a negative 1. So that's 4. So negative 2 goes with 4. So there's the point on the left side of the vertical asymptote, and so we can sketch that in. As we know, we've seen this before. So there you go. We've done what the directions wanted. We've got the sketch. We got the x and y intercept, and we've got the horizontal and vertical asymptote. So that's your example number 1. I'm going to go ahead and do the other examples here. So let's do example number 2. This time our equation is y is equal to 1 over x minus 1. So I'll draw the coordinate system. And let's find the asymptotes first. So the vertical asymptote, remember, look for values of x which make the denominator go to 0. Well, that's 1. When x is 1, you're going to divide by 0. And so you're not going to have a point there on your graph. So when x is 1, you have a vertical asymptote there. Okay, now look at the degree of the top versus the degree of the bottom. That's going to help us find the horizontal asymptote. So the degree of the bottom is 1. The degree of the top is 0. There is no variable up there. And so the degree of the bottom is greater than the degree of the top. So that means the horizontal asymptote for this rational function is on the x-axis. So there's the horizontal asymptote, right on the x-axis. Okay, now let's find out the x-intercept and the y-intercept. Okay, so the x-intercept, remember, is where y is 0. Look at your equation. Y will be 0 when the top of that fraction is 0. The top of that fraction is never going to be 0 because it's a constant 1. And not only that, notice that the x-axis is an asymptote, so the graph is not going to touch there. So there is not going to be an x-intercept. for this graph. Okay, so let's find the next y-intercept. So the y-intercept is, remember, where the graph crosses the y-axis, and that's going to be where x is 0. So you're going to plug 0 in for x in the equation and then calculate y, which if you do that is -1. So 0, -1 is the y-intercept. So we got a point right there at 0, -1. So we can sketch in this branch right here because we know it's a boomerang shape. It's not going to cross either asymptote. It's going to go through that point we just calculated. So there's that branch. So now we have this problem again where we need to find the other branch of the graph, and we've found all the intercepts that we can find. So we're just going to have to make another point in a table and find out where is there a point that we know to the right of that vertical asymptote. All right, so I'm going to choose 2 for x. Again, you're looking for numbers to plug into your equation, which makes your arithmetic easy. So if I plug in 2 for x, I got 1 over 1, which is 1. Right, because 2 minus 1 on the bottom is 1. 1 divided by 1 is 1. So 2 comma 1 is going to be a point on the graph, and that's locates now the quadrant that we're in right there. And so that's going to put your graph right here, the other branch of your graph. So that's the point that we know. So now we got both asymptotes in there. We got one intercept because the other one didn't exist. We do have both branches of the graph in there, so there's your sketch. Okay, so the last example on version 2 we'll talk about here is next. And so that's number 8 on page 2. So that equation is y is equal to 2x minus 6 divided by x minus 2. Okay, so again, we're going to look for the asymptote. So the vertical asymptote is where you divide by 0. Well, that's when x is 2. You can see from the bottom of that equation, if x is 2, you're going to divide by 0. So you're going to have a vertical asymptote there. And now remember, the horizontal asymptote comes from looking at the degree of the top versus the bottom. The degree of the top is 1 because the exponent on x is 1, and the degree of the bottom is also 1. So our horizontal asymptote is going to be y equals the ratio of the lead coefficients. The lead coefficient on top is 2. The lead coefficient on the bottom is 1. And so y equals 2. 2 over 1, y equals 2 is going to be that horizontal asymptote. Okay, so there's x equals 2, vertical asymptote, y equals 2, horizontal asymptote. All right, let's find the x-intercept and y-intercept next. So the x-intercept, remember, is a point on the x-axis where the y-coordinate is 0. How are we going to get y to be 0 in that equation? Well, y will be 0 when the top of the fraction is 0. So you're going to set 2x minus 6 equal to 0 and solve for x. So at 3, 0, the graph crosses the x-axis, and so you see that right there. And now we know where that first branch of the graph is, boomerang-shaped graph, so we can sketch it in there. Okay, so we are asked to find also the y-intercept. Remember, the y-intercept of the graph is where it crosses the y-axis. That's where x is 0. So plug 0 in for x in your equation 2 times, top and bottom. That's going to give you -6 over -3, -6 over -2, which is +3. So 0, 3 is going to be a point on your graph. And now we know where the other branch of the graph is. Boomerang shaped, trapped in between the vertical and horizontal asymptotes right there. Okay, so there's your 3, 0 x-intercept and 0, 3 y-intercept. You got the asymptotes and you got the branches of the graph. Okay, so we're going to take 2 days on this one also. So if you want to work ahead, that's fine. But tomorrow we'll just give you some more time to work on this so that you have enough time to finish all 10 questions. Okay, there you go. Good luck.